the webinar. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Erica, and I am in the Adult Services division here at the library, and I am also a podcaster. So I am bringing you today podcasting for beginners. So hopefully everybody can see my screen over here, and we're going to start moving forward. So I'll be covering some of the ideas to consider if you're thinking about creating and launching your own podcast. And we'll start from the initial idea and we'll work our way towards getting your podcast out to the world. Now, please feel free to jump in with any questions that you might have in the chat, and I'll do my best to watch those and answer as we go, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So let's talk about the idea. You may have come into this webinar with a podcast idea already, or you may be toying with some different ideas. Maybe you've got a handful of ideas that you're thinking about. I would love if you can use one of the hand emojis in Zoom. Let me know if you already have an idea that you're working with, no matter how vague or clear it is. So I'll see if anybody raises their hand or gives me any sort of note in the chat. So in the meantime, I'm going to be using my own podcast as an example, and that is the Magic Lantern podcast. My husband and I really wanted to create a podcast together. That's something that we wanted to do as a project together. We are lifelong film lovers, and there were a ton of podcasts out there that covered bad movies, but we couldn't find any shows that we really wanted to listen to. There weren't any shows that celebrated the love of movies or told the kind of stories that we wanted to hear. We also really felt like that we had good chemistry that would translate to the podcast medium. So first and foremost, we looked around to see if anyone else was already doing something so similar to what we were thinking about doing that we didn't want to duplicate it, or we felt like, well, we can't improve on that concept already, so let's do our own thing. So far, so good. Then we started to think about names for the podcast. We made a list of words that we liked that also reflected the purpose of the podcast. We had several ideas before we eventually hit upon the Magic Lantern podcast. And in the course of all this research, we determined that some of the names we liked were already in use in some form or fashion, so they would sound too similar to something else. And we also looked ahead to see if there were URLs, so web addresses, website names that were available to purchase once we had decided on the name, because we didn't want to have a name that we loved and then realize we couldn't get a website name that was anywhere close to it. So once we had that finalized, and in our case, we already knew that we wanted to work together, but only together. We didn't want to have episodes that were only me or only my husband. We didn't want to add other co-hosts. We didn't want to have a ton of guests. So we were thinking ahead about what the format of the show would be. So think about that show format and think about your time commitment. So should this show be just made by you, or do you think having a co-host or even more than one co-host would be more appropriate? So start to make some lists of shows that you like and those that you also don't like. That can be very important as well. What is it about these shows that either draws you in or keeps you away? And keep that list handy while you're creating your own idea. It can help you realize, oh, I want to sound like this, or I absolutely don't want to sound like this. So now that you've taken some time to get ready with your idea, I've included some examples of equipment that I have personally worked with, and I also brought one in that we use here at work. So you're going to want to start with a microphone first. And for example, I've included a very low cost option, which is this blue snowball, even though it's black. That's the name of the company. So you want to get a mic that is, number one, affordable for you, but is also going to give you the sound quality that you're looking for. So in the examples that I've included over here, there is this very expensive microphone, which is the microphone we eventually went to, and $400 is not cheap, and we had one for each of us, so that was a large money output. But first, we started with this USB microphone here on the right-hand side, 32 bucks, not too bad. So it was very doable for us to get started in that respect. Now you're going to want to do some trial and error with that. You're going to want to test some things out, and there are places that will allow you to rent equipment so you can see what something sounds like. Now, once we had really moved on from this lower cost mic and we had a larger listenership, that's when we really decided to upgrade. So, you might be able to use a lower cost mic for a longer period of time. Now, the thing to consider though, once we moved up to this higher cost mic, which is not a USB mic, it's a studio microphone, an XLR, which refers to its plug-in, its connection, we had to get a mixer because we had multiple audio channels coming in, and you can't plug an XLR into a laptop, for example. So we had to think about the recording process. And the sound mixer was not too bad. My husband is a musician as well, so he has a lot more experience in purchasing that kind of equipment. So we had sort of a basis to start with to try. But we've now used it for many, many years, and it's paid for itself a long time ago. And another reason that we had to get that mixer is that I tend to have a lower, quieter voice. My husband tends to have a higher volume, louder voice. And so that meant that with those two audio channels coming into that mixer, our levels are not the same. And I'll get to that in just a second, because that's also a recording question that you're going to need to answer for yourself. But before we move on to that, though, let's keep thinking about audio quality. So in the podcasts that you like, maybe some of those that you wrote down for yourself that we talked about a second ago, how is the audio quality? Is it low? Is it high? Are you a person that likes really crisp, clean audio? Maybe you tend to like more of a DIY aesthetic. And something to think about, again, to go back for a second, if you are going to have more co-hosts, that's more audio to manage. So do you know how to do that? Or does someone in your group know how to do that? You may have to educate yourself about expertise in managing this kind of equipment. And we've got some new people that have joined us. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to throw those into the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of our session as well. So let's assume now that you've had some time to test some equipment. You've decided what you reasonably can afford and what you can maintain. So now you need to think about the recording of the podcast and how you will edit it, if you'll edit it at all. So I wanted to include some free platforms that make this easy, and there are tons and tons out there, so this is not an exhaustive list. You want to do a little bit of research and try them out to see, because you're going to be the one doing the work, presumably, you need to know how to use these. So for example, for our podcast, we use Audacity to both record and edit the show. And it's a pretty common one among podcasters. It's a free platform, but it definitely involves a learning curve. You've got things like GarageBand. There are tons of other platforms out there. So a couple of statistics for you when we think about actually putting the work into the show. Did you know most podcasts end within 12 episodes or 6 months? So I've been doing mine for 6 years, so we've definitely surpassed that benchmark, but it is a lot of work, so something to consider. Not everybody wants to continue with it. So you want to decide if you're intending to make a podcast with essentially no end date in sight, maybe do it until you don't want to do it anymore. Or maybe you want to do a limited run show. Think something like Serial, for example, that is only built to have X number of episodes. Some podcasts use seasons as well. So that could give you a time to, kind of recover from season 1, get ready for season 2. Whatever kind of date or length of time that you want to stick with, you're still going to have to make a schedule. You don't want your listeners to have to guess when a new episode is coming out or if one's coming out at all. If they had to do that, they likely won't stick with you. So it is a good rule of thumb to pick a consistent day of the week and time, generally, to drop your episodes. So, for example, going back again to my podcast, our regular episodes went out on alternating Mondays. So that was generally 2 Mondays per week, depending on the length of the month. We also then later on added Patreon. So we created bonus episodes, and those went out on the other Mondays. This meant that we were putting out new content every week. So when you're considering making that schedule, it's not just about when the show is going to go out. That's a consistent time that people can remember. They'll expect it to pop up in their subscription feed. You also have to think about all the time that you need to get the show ready. So prep time. If you're going to write the show, if you're going to script it, which is what I do, if the time that's going to take you to record the episode. So for example, for an hour episode with my podcast, it would typically take us 2 to 3 hours to record it. Because we also then did a lot of editing. We edited it for content and sound. And then you need the time to publish it. All of those steps take time. So you don't want to find yourself on a show day with nothing to put out or trying to scramble and edit for hours straight overnight. So you want to build that into your schedule. So then you're going to have to think about storage and hosting. Your episodes are going to have to be stored somewhere, and that storage site is going to have to work with whatever website platform that you end up using. So for example, I included Blueberry. Blueberry is a very common podcast host. So all the episodes get stored there, and it works directly with WordPress, for example, which is the way that we use to create our website. There's a special plugin, so you only have to post the show in one location and it pushes it out to other places, which is very, very helpful. And that, again, is a very common thing these days. It's a lot fewer steps for you as the creator to have to go through. Keep in mind, though, there is a fee for hosting. It's based on the size of your files. So for example, for our show, we can't store more than 2 episodes per month with Blueberry. Otherwise, we get pushed into a higher price bracket because that an additional show just means a higher size of the entire content. And we decided we were going to stick with keeping in one price bracket. That just made more sense for us. So investigate these podcast hosts and the storage, see what works with your budget. Or maybe you decide to go with something like SoundCloud or Bandcamp, for example. Lots of other options out there for you. Okay, so you've got the nuts and bolts in place to begin recording. But where are you going to record? Will this be in your house? I'm assuming that you're not going to be leasing a recording space. You're not going to be paying engineers and editors. We're assuming that this is all you. So I've included an example of, just a stock photo of some people doing a podcast. And then also on the right, I included a photo from our space. So we ended up setting up our podcasting table and all of our equipment. You'll see our mixer, our 2 studio mics, our sound booster, plus we each have studio headphones as well. We ended up putting that in our media room so that then we never have to move space. Here's how we discovered to do it back there. So this is a little bit of experimentation. So grab your new microphone or even your phone, anything that you're going to record yourself with. Walk around the different parts of your home, record yourself in different areas. You will notice some rooms will sound better than others. So when we first started, We realized our kitchen would be ideal. There was great space for it. We could move around easily. We could manage everything. But as soon as we went to do a recording, we realized it just sounds cavernous because there's just too much open space. It sounded like we weren't even in the same room together. We went the other direction. We tried a closet, and it was just too cramped. We couldn't move, even though the sound was really good because of all of the dampeners that happen with the clothes. So we discovered, okay, let's head back to our spare bedroom where we keep all of our media. We could add some sound dampening like rugs and curtains, and it made the recording process sound very intimate, meaning that we were close together. You could tell we were in the same room. The volume was all great. There wasn't a lot of echo. There weren't other issues happening that would bounce into the sound, come into our mics, and ruin our audio. And that is the picture that I've included here. We also set it up this way so that we would never have to break the equipment down, because there's nothing more annoying than getting completely set up and then realize, oh, we've got to move it into the other space because we're having family dinner or something. So we have our table that we can move in and out, but everything is in its place on that table and doesn't need to move. So let's assume now you've got this show and it's ready to go out into the world. So there are going to be places that you want to make sure that you're uploading your episodes so that everybody can hear them. I've included just some of the places where we have a presence. So that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We have a YouTube channel where I upload the video of our audio to include there. And that's just a couple of the places. There are so many podcatchers out there. That's a place that aggregates all of these podcasts and makes them so that people can get them on whatever format their device is. So whether that's an Android, something like Stitcher Radio might be a good way to go. Or if you've got iPhones, that's going to be Apple Podcasts by and large. So do you want to try to gain a large audience with your podcast? Or is it something that you're perfectly delighted to just stick with, doing it for yourself and sharing it with friends and family? Just a question to consider. And of course, that answer can change over time. But whatever you decide, that's going to directly translate into the work that you're going to have to do to promote the podcast. So let's talk about building a look and feel for your show. Now, this can be as low key or as high tech as you want it to be. We really wanted to create an image for ourselves. But if you look at other podcasts, sometimes it's just, some word art that somebody's created in some form or fashion. We ended up going to a place like iStock Photo and getting a vector image that we really liked, which was the projector. So we purchased it for our use, following all of the rules that go along with that, so that we can push it out in these other formats. We also really wanted to have a website. We really wanted it to be official and give people a lot of different touch points to get to us. So we created this WordPress theme that we really loved, and we carried all of our colors and all of the formatting through to everything because we wanted there to be a cohesive feel. So again, you might decide on a logo that you want to create. You may not. There's no right or wrong answer. But keep in mind, if you decide that you do want to try to build maybe a brand or sort of a visual look for everything, there are tons of free or very low cost options out there, like Canva, for example, and then so many other programs that you can build, that you can use to build. All of these things are available within your phone, for example. So music. I wanted to point you back again to these places, these podcasts that you have written down for yourself that you like or hate. You're probably going to notice that the majority of them have some kind of intro and outro music. So I was having a little bit of trouble earlier playing this audio clip. I'm not going to try again and bore everybody with it, but I wanted to include directly one of our episodes so you can hear the intro and outro. So we got lucky again. My husband is a musician. We used a section of one of his songs because he has all of the rights to it. We used a section for the intro and a different section for the outro. Maybe you have original music that you own that you want to use. Maybe you have music that you want to create yourself in GarageBand or something like that. Maybe you want to use sound effects, or maybe you just want to start talking. All a good. There again is no right or wrong answer. But keep in mind, if you do want to go with something like music or sound effects, that you don't have the ability to create that yourself, you can find free or copyright included music that you can purchase for a small fee to be able to use for your podcast. Now, I mentioned again about building the website. Not everybody does. We have many, many podcaster friends. I would say probably half of them have no website and the others do. We're in the category that do. So think about how your web presence is going to go. So you might want to do a website, but at the very least, I will say you're going to want to try to do something with social media. You need to promote the show. So we have a private Facebook group for us and our fans. We have a Facebook page for the show itself. We post regularly to many, many different social media outlets. And we also interact regularly with people in the web sphere. So we've got an Instagram, Twitter, a TikTok. We participate in Reddit, Discord, all sorts of relevant podcast groups where we try to get the show out there. And we've gained a lot of listeners that way too. So once the show is up and running, is it time for you to think about, I want to try to make some money off of this, provided that the concept is viable. Not every show is necessarily made to get advertisers or supporters, but if you've done it for any length of time, I guarantee you will get questions from friends and family asking, hey, do you have any sponsors yet? Or once you listen to all of these shows that you like, you are going to hear familiar ads for businesses that specifically support the podcast space. Let me give you some examples. I'm sure you could add to them. Daily Harvest, MeUndies, Squarespace. How many times have you heard those advertisers in podcasts? So do you want to try to make money? If so, there are some different options for you. I mentioned earlier, we started a Patreon account, which is a great space for podcasters. We did that after about a year of doing the show. It was a way for us to earn a small income, very small income, that allowed us to support things like those big equipment purchases, hosting costs. It also essentially offset our time a little bit because we put so much work into it. It was almost a part-time job. And there are a number of creators on Patreon who earn big bucks. I'm talking about tens of thousands of dollars per month on their podcast. That doesn't mean that every show can turn a profit. Now, we did start to get inquiries from some businesses about advertising on our podcast, and we decided against it for two big reasons, and that was just specific to us. We really felt like that our listenership was not so large that we could essentially justify what we would earn. We had hundreds of thousands of listeners, not tens of thousands of listeners, which is what these advertisers might be looking for. And we also decided we didn't want to have ads in the show. So that was, kind of a big thing for us to stick with. Whatever decision though you make is completely up to you, and totally feel great about it. Okay, so I whipped through that, so I'm happy to answer any questions. If you want to unmute yourself or put them in the chat, I am here for any and all of your questions. Anybody out there want to share any podcasting ideas that they have? It looks like Kamal is going to come on and ask a
Hey,
question. Hi.
yes. Hi, thank you for hosting this. This is really helpful for me. Um,
Absolutely.
Again, just to give you a little background, I'm attending this class on behalf of my daughter.
Great.
She i- she is a 11-year-old. She is right now occupied in another class. She is doing a series of podcast. She is part of a leadership program, and she is working on food waste. And she has like 4 episodes that she is planning. And it's more like first episode is like literally where she is giving facts and talking, and the
Hmm.
following 3 episodes are more of interview thing
Okay, great.
with
Very
different
fun.
companies. So she's right now working on, as I said, material and script and all those things. We've created a account on, I want to say, Anchor, and we both are learning. We are first timers and learning how to do all those things.
Hmm.
So this class came at the right time for us to learn. So we were wondering, like, what we were considering. Again, we I had never thought about buying a decent mic or
Hmm.
anything. We just
Hmm.
have a simple headset with a microphone. We started recording. She is working on her speech and tone using that.
Hmm.
Uh, so what I was Googling and learning is they say like do a simple recording rather than using this platform. So we
Hmm.
were thinking of creating a MP4 file and then uploading. Is this something you would recommend, or using the platform is a better way?
So whatever you end up deciding to go with, you're probably going to have to upload. So I'm sorry. Let me take a step back for a second and make sure I'm answering your question. So if it's something that's going to go out to different places, beyond just this one platform that you might be using, you're going to want to have MP4s of it. And I unfortunately do not know that platform, but my guess is, because I can tell you this is the way Audacity is, same with GarageBand, same with a number of other sound audio recording
Uh-huh.
platforms, is that you can convert it to an MP4. Um, for example, that's what I do when I end up making the YouTube video. So we made our recording in Audacity, edited in Audacity. It's an Audacity file. We then convert it to an MP4
Oh,
or an
got it.
MP3 in order to use it in other ways. I don't know that that fully answers your question.
Yes, no, that is helpful. So maybe Anchor might be having some similar option wherein we can record and then download it MP4 file and then use other platform to upload the same file rather than redoing it.
Right, right. Yeah.
Okay.
And without, I probably won't take a second to look at that, but yes, that is something for you to look at to see if it will still allow you, and I bet that it will.
Okay, got it. And if no one else has a question right now, can I ask few more questions, please?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, please.
Would you recommend any sites where we can post this podcast? Again, as I said, it might qualify under like a youth activist kind of a topic.
Absolutely.
So,
So there are once you kind of get in the space of podcasting, you're gonna find that there are tons of recommendations out there for things like that. So, for example, we post quite a bit to Reddit. There are certain forums, and I know Reddit might seem scary and gross, and you're not wrong, but there are certain forums that are specifically dedicated to different interests. So I bet there is a food waste forum out there.
oh, okay.
And so she could say, hey, if anybody wants to check out these episodes, here's where you can find them. You don't have to actually include the episode, but just a link to it, something like that is usually a good way to go. Um, she might find great spaces in Discord to do it. There are also other aggregate podcasting groups that are just for sharing episodes, and we're in a few of those. So it's just basically, hey, all these people are producing podcasts. There are interested listeners in that audience too, and so on Monday, my husband would just go in and say, latest episode is up, and so people can listen to it or not, provided if they're not film lovers, which is what our podcast is, they don't necessarily need to know about it, but food waste might be right up their alley. So there's also a New York Times podcast. I forget what it's called. It's a place to go post your podcast, and it happens every Saturday. And that's for
Okay.
everybody, around the world to go include your stuff. So when she starts to find just these kind of special interest groups where they live on the web, that could be Facebook groups that she might join, that she could post her stuff to. And there are probably rules and regulations around that. Some groups will say, okay, only share that stuff on a Sunday or on a Monday or whatever.
Okay.
But so I would just treat it as, this is something that I'm interested in. How many other groups or spaces or websites or listservs can I find that just sort of add it to the list? And when you're doing your social media post or your promotion, you just go through everyone and post, post, post.
Post. And are this like when you say they'll allow you to post, is it for a fee or it's free?
Typically it should be free. You should never have to pay somewhere to just post a link to the show.
Okay.
They're not ads, for example. So they also may ask you to interact as opposed to just, bombarding people with podcasts or sales or something like that. So imagine that they want you to be an active member and participate here, instead of just, dropping stuff and running away, which should probably be really fun for your daughter, talking with other people who are interested in the thing that she's interested in.
Interesting. Totally. Yeah. And again, as I just mentioned, she is a 11-year-old. So posting material from a 11-year-old on these things, are there any age criterias that we should be looking into considering? And
Yes,
especially I'm concerned about some negative comments coming her way.
absolutely.
So
So that could mean that you may want to stay away from something like Reddit completely.
okay.
Maybe you're only looking for youth forums, for example, that you have to say, okay, I am this age, or my parent or guardian is going to be posting this. So I would put this into your lap for you guys to do together, do the research together,
Got it.
see how many places that you can find, and you as the parent look at them and say, okay, no, that one's right out the window, or this one is totally appropriate, great. And maybe that shrinks the list, or maybe you'll find, oh, there are plenty of places that are youth friendly, where I'm not going to get nasty comments back on any of this stuff. I will also, though, preface that comment by saying it is the internet.
Yes.
Somebody
Yeah,
somebody
totally.
will still decide to look at a post by an 11-year-old and say, well, I don't care about this. Sometimes you can't stop that stuff. And so it might also mean that when she is then going back to look at comments or answer stuff, that maybe you go in first and
Yeah.
you delete something. I don't want to scare anybody, but
No,
we
totally. That makes sense. Yeah.
understand the way the internet works these
And yeah,
days, sadly. So I'll tell
totally.
you, in all 6 years of doing the podcast, we've had maybe, one or two weirdly negative comments, and the worst that's happened on Reddit, for example, are just downvotes.
Okay.
So it hasn't been a terrifying ordeal for us, thankfully.
Yes. No, totally. And the reason I asked, being first timer, we don't know what we are getting into. So I don't want to drag my daughter into like an unknown gray area and then regret it.
Right, absolutely. So you be her partner, but you be maybe one step ahead.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much. I guess you have answered a lot of my questions. Thank you.
Sure. It looked like Mandy was maybe going to ask a question.
Hello? Can you
Yes.
hear me now? I have a question. You said something about for friends and family. What if you wanted to keep it just for family? Like, I have a lot of people that in my family that are interested in some of our stories of our ancestors. And I was thinking of doing something, either a Zoom or something like this, as far as talking to about some of the family stories that we remember.
Mhm.
And how would you keep it more private out instead of out there? Like you're saying, it's going to be on the internet. I don't really want it out there in the internet and people just running
Sure.
with it.
Absolutely. So that's probably the easiest way to go. That means that there's just way less for you to do.
Right.
You are concentrating on recording the episode and then storing them somewhere. That could just be that if you are talking about recording some content that would be more than kind of a one-time thing. Let's just say, just hypothetically, Mandy, that you've got 10 interviews that you want to record this year or something, and friends and family might be really interested in hearing them. You're going to have to figure out some place where they're going to live. And I would say probably the easiest way to go, if I had to think about it right this second, is let's say that you're recording it on Zoom, and then you put the Zoom recording on your Facebook page. Or you decide to create a YouTube channel for free and you
Okay.
just upload the stuff right there. And then you're sending your friends and family those links.
Okay, well, right now, like I have some genealogy groups that are for family. And so I have different surnames with our families. So I could just put it out there on those genealogy groups on Facebook.
You could, yeah, just share it directly with them.
Okay. All right.
Then you wouldn't have to worry about, okay, I need to have my podcast listed in Apple Podcast and across all of these podcatchers. And then I need to have a web presence for it and social media presence. You wouldn't have to do all of those things unless you decided at some point that you wanted to. You could create a very low cost website to store a lot of that stuff too. Just something to think about down the road after you maybe have a body of recorded content. Then you can sort of decide, well, how do I want this to live on beyond me?
Okay. Well, I really like your podcast. It's really nice. And I've been listening to some other ones. So I was curious to find out exactly would it work for me as far as for genealogy stories. So
yeah, I think it really could. It's just doesn't involve as much work, which is, could be a good thing.
I like the Zoom part. It's easier, I think, like you're saying. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Or anything else I can go back to that anybody missed? And by the way, I've been recording the podcast recording the webinar, and it will go up on our social media as well. So if you missed it, you'll have it. And I can, of course, answer any questions through our social media too. It looks like maybe somebody else has a question.
Yeah, this is Serena. I borrowed Faradun Kareem's account for Zoom, so I apologize for not having my real name up there.
No problem, Serena.
I do not have enough information in my brain to ask a question, but I did want to thank you for what you are doing and thank the library for presenting things like this, because I think it's a wonderful resource for the community.
Oh, well, my pleasure.
I know you're appreciated.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you have an idea that you're working on, Serena? Something that appeals to you?
Well, I'm just now getting acquainted with podcasts, and I had no idea what all had to be done before you could even make one. But I like Mandy's idea. I like to tell short stories, and I like to hear family stories, and I think that's a wonderful idea. I appreciate the fact that she talked about what her plans were.
Yeah, there are so many new and different ways to look at podcasting. It doesn't just have to be this hour-long blah, 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 blah. People are working with the format and doing so many cool things. And if you think about it as just a way to record your story, like you're mentioning, and share it with a small number of people or a large number of people, you would be surprised at how many people actually want to hear your story. For example, we're at something like 100,000 downloads for our show, and people in Korea listening to us, people in Turkey, people in Malta, people in South America, people all over the place that, of course, I don't know personally. I have no idea how they found us, but they listen. And we now have this community of people far and wide that we see in our Facebook group where we're constantly interacting with. And it's really fun. And I did get a question in the chat. Kat asked, why did you want to do a podcast? What inspired you to do so? So the big thing for me, Kat, was that, or for us, I should say, my husband and I as co-hosts, we realized that there was no show that was what we really wanted to listen to. There was no show specifically for us. When I first started the webinar, I was talking about, we have a film podcast, and there are tons of podcasts in that space that talk about bad movies, but nobody really celebrating, at least to us, what we love about film. So we're excited about film, and we want to share those things that we love. And we have a wide film knowledge, a wide level of experience. And so there are a lot of things that we could talk about. And also were not a lot of women in that space. So that was a big deal for me. There are tons of men talking about film, doing a great job of it, but not necessarily that approach of husband and wife, man and woman, friends, anything like that. So we thought, okay, well, there's a space for our voice here. After all of that research, we realized, okay, I think we've got a story to tell that would be of interest, at least to us. We'll see how it goes. And it just sort of took off. And we also decided to do the podcast because we wanted to work together. And we had to make that commitment. That was an important thing to do because, like I mentioned, we went full on with our podcast. So it was a lot of work. For my husband, it was 20 plus hours a week to prep, record, edit the show. For me, closer probably to 10 because the editing took a long time. Because I'll say, if you were to ask my husband, I make a lot of mouth sounds, evidently. I think at one point he likened it to an octopus with glue in its mouth. And so you may not hear that from me over the course of this little mic, but when I'm being recorded on a really high quality mic and you're listening with studio headphones and in a high quality audio recording and editing suite, it's very recognizable. And for him as a musician, as a sound person, that was not acceptable. But you're going to hear tons of other podcasts where clearly nobody has edited a thing, and that's fine. Or maybe they've just edited it for content as opposed to audio. So many different ways to do this. There's not a right or wrong answer. But when we decided, to bring it back to your question, when we decided we're going to do this, we want to do this together, we're excited about this, we had to make that commitment because doing the show has been hard. It's been difficult. There are plenty of times where I really just didn't want to put in 10 hours that week to work on this thing. But that's a commitment that I made. And we have a schedule to keep, and we have people donating to the show. So there's some level of responsibility there. So again, not to scare anybody, because, for example, Kamal and Mandy and maybe even Serena, with the idea that she was talking about with storytelling, these can be shows that are quote unquote easier to produce. Maybe they take a little bit less time. And then some people go into it thinking, this is what I want to do with my life. So you've got everything in between. You've got a huge spectrum of experience and time, and you can fit anywhere within that spectrum. So I hope that answers your question, Kat. Anything else from anybody that I can answer? And while anybody is thinking of a question, so I'm here at the library. You know, if you come in, you'll probably see me at some point. You can ask me questions then. You can ask any specific podcast questions. You can send those to magiclanternpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll put this here in the chat. Feel free to, we're always happy to help at Gmail. And great, Kat, I'm glad that answered your question. magiclanternpodcast@gmail.com. You can go to our website as well. We've also got tons of helpful books here too about starting podcasts. There are a million videos on YouTube with very helpful information. So the info is out there. So never fear about that. And yes, Kamal, please feel free to get in touch at any point. So I'll give everybody another minute to think about any other questions that they may have before we sign off. And I'll send the recording also to everyone who registered for the event too. So you'll be able to get a copy of that. Yes, you are very welcome. Everyone is very, very welcome. Yes, I'm at the library right now, by the way. Yeah, there's the teen event was happening earlier. So I'm hoping that once we share the video with social media too, our young folks will see. Okay, if nobody else has a question, I will go ahead and end our recording.